I was born in Argentina in 1887, the daughter of Irish immigrants who carried the sound of Atlantic wind in their voices and the promise of work in their hands. My earliest memories are of wide skies, dust lifting from the pampas, and my mother's quiet strength as she folded sheets in the evening light. Illness found me early. I was a frail child, skin pale as new paper, lungs stubborn and shallow. Doctors shook their heads. My mother did not. She sat beside me through long nights and said, "Breathe, Violet." So I did. Breath by breath I stayed. Perhaps survival was destined to be my companion, though I could not have known how many times fate would demand proof of it. My father died when I was young, and the house changed shape without his voice. We learned to make do. My mother took work as a stewardess on ships, the kind of labor that leaves hands cracked and voices polite even when the world is unkind. When illness defeated her, I took the uniform she had worn and smoothed it over my own shoulders. I was barely 20, more girl than woman, the sea smelling of iron and coal and a life that was not yet mine. The first time I walked up a gangway, I felt the ship beneath my feet, like a heartbeat. "Keep your balance," an older stewardess told me, half kindly, half warning. "The floor moves, and so must you." I learned quickly. Sheets must be tight enough to please a sharp eye, kettles, hot but not scalding, voices, soft but firm. I learned to be invisible when needed and unmistakable when called. The RMS Olympic welcomed me with a polished smile and brass that caught the sun. She was the pride of the White Star Line, launched in 1911, a palace that floated, carried by engines that seemed too confident to fail. Her corridors lengthened into perspective until one could imagine them touching the horizon itself. I remember the smell of beeswax on the stair rails, the sweetness of tea and coal mingling in the air, and the ripple of conversation as passengers drifted from saloon to promenade. I was young, eager, careful. It is easy, when serving comfort, to believe in its permanence. On my second week aboard, a gentleman in tweed lifted his teacup and smiled at me. "Quite the ship," he said. "She's the largest afloat," I replied, steadying the tray. "Largest and safest," he chuckled. "We've improved the sea, haven't we?" I gave him the polite smile that service requires. "We do our best," I said. From dawn to dusk, the ship taught me her choreography. 3 knocks for first-class doors, 2 for second, a brisk step past crew quarters, a turn at the landing where the light fell in a square. I learned faces the way one learns cities, all routes returning to the same few streets. "Hot water at 7, said one voice. "Toast after church," said another. A child asked if the ship slept. "Only when the passengers do," I told her, and she nodded as if I had explained the moon. The sea was kind that week, flat as a promise. The Olympic moved with the calm arrogance of a thing made by men who believed in the future. Then a day arrived that taught me the future is also made by luck. We were sailing near the Isle of Wight, wind modest, light clean and thin. I was in a corridor carrying a stack of fresh towels when the ship shuddered as if struck from below by a giant fist. The sound was wrong, metal crying, crockery smashing, voices turning sharp. I braced against the wall. The HMS Hawk had collided with us, its prow piercing our side. Passengers spilled into passageways, some pale and silent, others loud with questions no one could answer quickly. "Miss, what is it?" a woman asked, clutching her boy's arm so hard he winced. "Please stay calm," I said, though my heart had begun its own race. "The officers are managing it. I'll help you to a safe place." An officer strode past, boots purposeful. "Steady now," he called. "No need to panic. We'll make port." Behind him, a junior steward whispered to me, "The damage is forward." "How bad?" He shook his head in that way men do when uncertainty must look like certainty. "We'll keep her upright." The ship's bones groaned. In the dining saloon, a mountain of plates fell as if rehearsed for catastrophe. I helped collect children away from sharp edges, guided an elderly couple to seats, and passed a shawl to a woman who couldn't stop shivering, though the air was not cold. "Is the sea taking us?" she murmured. "I have a letter to post in Southampton." "The sea is not taking us," I said. "You will post your letter." I wanted that to be true, needed it to be true, and tried to speak it into existence. We limped, there is no better word, back to port. The Olympic held herself proud, even injured. When the engine slowed and the quay rose toward us, relief moved through the ship like warm air. People thanked God, thanked the crew, thanked anyone they could see. I went back to my work. Trays still needed washing. Sheets still needed folding. Shock, I discovered, leaves one craving ordinary tasks. It steadies the hands. That night in my bunk, the sound of steel, grinding replayed with unwelcome clarity. I saw again the face of the boy whose mother had gripped him too tightly and the old man who had kept his hat on through it all, as if bareheadedness would tempt bad luck closer. I asked myself if courage is something one has or something one does. My hands had trembled, but they had steadied other hands. Perhaps that was enough. Days later, I poured tea for the gentleman in tweed again. He laughed, a little smaller than before. Safe as houses, I said, he murmured. We were fortunate, I replied. Fortune is a fickle crewman, he said, and then, after a pause, Thank you for your service, miss. You're welcome, I said. All I had done was hold doors, hold hands, hold fast. But sometimes holding is the whole of a task. Work continued. Ships do not stop for fear. I learned more lives, more preferences. Turkish bath at 5, said one man. My daughter's stomach is delicate, said a woman. I brought ginger biscuits. There is dignity in service when one does it well. The sea seemed to accept our return to routine. My own heart learned to accept that fear can sit quietly beside duty without tipping the tray. When I wrote home, I did not mention the word collision. I wrote instead of work and tea and the view from the promenade deck when the sky leaned down to touch the water. My mother told me to pray. I did, though I also polished, folded, and carried. Faith needs hands. I remember a morning when the light was so clear the brass railings looked like lines drawn by a careful artist. A child asked me whether the ship had a soul. Everything that moves has a kind of soul, I said, even water and wind. Then she's alive, the child decided. She feels alive to me, I said and meant it. Crew talk travels faster than the ship itself. Word of repairs, schedules, passengers of note. All of it moves along the arteries of a vessel, animating its daily pulse. The Hawk incident became a story, told quickly and then slowly, each teller shaving off panic and adding a layer of bravado, as if courage could be carved from narrative. I did not tell the story. I carried it. There is a difference. Facts can be folded like sheets. Memories must be stored carefully lest they yellow. A week after our return to port, I stood beside a porthole watching gulls stitch the air. A young steward leaned against the bulkhead. First scare, he asked. First of that kind, I said. You see enough, he told me, and you start reading the sea. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, listen. I listened, I said. He nodded at the porthole view. Keep listening. I did. I listened to the hum of engines as a sentence of reassurance, and to the silence between waves as punctuation that could mislead. I listened to passengers and found that fear makes all voices kin. A first-class gentleman whispers, like a third-class mother when danger enters a room. And when safety follows, gratitude sounds the same in every language. I will say this as simply as I can. The Olympic taught me that ships are both marvel and machine, both sanctuary and risk. She taught me to serve with steadiness when steadiness is scarce. She taught me the strange mathematics of chance, that some cups spill and some hands tighten and some prayers are answered by the noise of engines continuing their labor. She did not teach me that I would survive more than one calamity. The future kept that for itself. But she taught me how to stand when the floor moves and how to speak when truth prefers silence. When I returned to shore between voyages, people asked what life at sea was like. Orderly, I said. Then not. A cousin wanted to hear about famous passengers. I told her instead about a girl who thought the ship slept. A neighbor asked me if I felt afraid. Sometimes, I said, but fear is like a coat. You wear it when the weather demands, and you take it off when the sun returns. And if the sun doesn't return, then you keep working, I said. Work, in its way, is a lantern. There were nights when I woke with the sound of steel in my ears and steadied myself by remembering the ordinary. A teacup's handle, the crisp corner of a sheet, the warmth of a kitchen where crew laughed too loudly to undo the quiet that followed shock. I learned that memory arrives with its own agenda and that soothing it requires kindness to oneself. I allowed myself to be tired. I allowed myself to marvel at the horizon as if it were always new. The Olympic continued, repaired and proud, and so did I. My hands found their rhythm again. My steps remembered each turn of the corridor. There were days so peaceful I almost forgot the Hawk's teeth. But I did not fully forget. A stewardess learns to carry both the weight and its absence. In that balance, one finds a way forward. When passengers disembarked, some looked back at the ship as if leaving a friend. I looked too and saw not a friend but a teacher. She had taught me that a life can be held together by duty even when the world attempts to scatter it. She had shown me that if asked, I could hold other people steady while my own breath shook. She had told me in her grinding, hurting voice on that day near the Isle of Wight, that the sea writes its own terms and that we, stubborn and small, must write our own answers beneath them. I did not yet know I would stand on another deck, under colder stars, and listen to the ocean pronounce a verdict no engineer could overturn. I did not yet know I would sit in a lifeboat and feel the universe divide itself into those who remained and those who did not. What I knew then was enough. That I could work, that I could listen, that I could bear fear without letting it own my hands. I folded my uniform and slept. Morning would come, and with it tea, towels, names, and the sea, the same and always different, a mirror and a mystery. I was Violet Jessop, stewardess, servant of order, student of chance. The ocean had tested me once and left me standing. I would meet it again. Southampton wore its work like a smell: coal and salt and rope fibers, damp wool and impatience. The morning we boarded, the quay throbbed with voices, porters heaved trunks, and gulls stitched white arcs above a hull whose black sides felt too vast to fit inside a person's understanding. The letters Titanic gleamed like a promise on her stern. I stood by the gangway, adjusting the strap of my satchel, watching families halt to look up as if at a cathedral. A woman in a feathered hat touched my sleeve. "Isn't she magnificent?" "She is," I said. "Everything about her feels new." "New and safe," she whispered, half prayer, half boast. "Unsinkable." I glanced at the ship, wood polish, brass, canvas, and rope, 100 hands turning labor into certainty. "We'll take good care of you aboard," I replied, stepping aside for a boy dragging a toy boat on a string. "Will mine float too?" he asked, holding up the little hull. "For as long as you let it," I said, and his mother laughed, the sound lifting for a moment above the grind of winches. Inside, the ship's heartbeat announced itself. Engines murmuring through carpet, a pulse felt more in the ribs than ears. I learned the staircases in one sweep, the curve of the balustrade, the landing where light fell like honey, and the acoustics of the grand staircase where a single voice could rise and drown in velvet. We memorized knocks for doors. 3 for first class, 2 for second, 1 long for crew. I folded sheets, centered vases, refreshed brass with cloth until reflection answered like a second presence. On that first afternoon, the dining saloon churned with conversation. A gentleman in a pale waistcoat raised his cup. "Miss, the tea, Darjeeling, if possible." "Of course, sir," I said, balancing the tray with the small pride that comes from motion repeated until it looks effortless. "Safe as houses," he added, glancing around. "You must feel lucky to serve on her." "I feel fortunate to be working, sir," I said, which was both truth and deflection. Ships are not feelings, they are tasks. The feelings come later, uninvited. Routine made a calendar of hours. Morning brought the soft lift of bed linens, the scent of soap and starch, the swish of skirts. Noon glittered with cutlery, waiters moving in synchronized lines, the rustle of menus like another fabric in motion. Dusk was promenade, the sky gold and then iron, passengers strolling the rail. Music from the band braided through each stairwell. Hot water at 7, one voice said. Toast after chapel, another. Children ran, faces flushed by novelty. "Does the ship sleep?" a girl asked me. "Only when the passengers do," I replied, and she nodded as if I'd answered something philosophical. I loved the order, the way work found its path, like a river. I loved the tapping of the Marconi keys, somewhere distant through the mind, messages stitching the ship to the world. I loved the idea that everything had a place and my job was to keep it there, not for the sake of rules, but because order is a kindness when people travel. It tells them the universe holds. On April 14th, the air sharpened, the sea turned glass. Cold licked the edges of the promenade. The stars pricked clear and numerous, as if the sky had been polished too. After midnight, the ship felt like a library, the hush of sleeping bodies, the old page-turn of the Atlantic beneath. I lay down, half in uniform because we'd promised an early morning to a family traveling with 2 fidgeting children. I listened to the engines, counted the beats to calm my breath, thought of my mother's voice. "Breathe, Violet." The tremor came like a line drawn under a sentence. Not violent at first. A kind of shudder the body doubts before it admits. Then a longer scrape, metal against something not meant for metal. The ship's mood changed. I sat up, heart suddenly loud. Feet thudded in the corridor. A steward passed, Cap Askew. "What is it?" I asked. "Forward damage," he said, quietly, not stopping. "Precaution only." Precautions do not wake an entire deck. But I repeated the word to myself like a charm. Precaution, precaution. Down the passage, a gentleman appeared in stockings and robe. "Is it serious?" he asked, voice tight. "I don't believe so, sir," I said, which was the most courage I could make in a sentence. "Please remain calm." The order arrived as certainty often does, abruptly. women and children first. Life jackets, distributed. We gathered families, explained buckles, tightened straps. Fear has a smell, sour with effort, salted by tears, and it moves quickly through enclosed spaces. I put my hand on elbows, shoulders, wrists, and learned that touch can be both instruction and mercy. Step in, madam, I urged at boat 16, helping a woman clutching her baby. Will we be safe? She asked, wide-eyed, searching my face for a future I did not own. Yes, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. You'll be safe. Beside her, a matron hesitated, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. My husband, she said. He promised. He'll follow, I told her, but you must go now. Her grip on my hand hurt, every knuckle remarking upon its duty. An officer's face hovered in windburn and resolve. Lower away, he called, and the rope sighed. Our deck rose as the sea accepted us. The ship's lights made a temporary constellation above, the grand staircases glow, the promenade's long sentences of illumination, the whispering glitter of glass. The cold reached my bones like a lesson. In the boat, wood creaked and voices wove. My husband, he stayed, a woman whispered, as if confession could undo the physics. I held her hand. The night's silence between sounds expanded, then contracted around a cry, then another, then too many, then fewer. Oars, someone commanded, and men began to row, their breath making clouds, their palms raw against handles. The relief of action is something I will never undervalue. You can row even when you cannot think. You can pass a shawl, adjust a strap, say hold on, and mean it, even when meaning feels as small as a star. A child stared at me with the stunned calm children where when the world has slipped its usual clothes. Will they bring us back? The child asked. They'll bring you somewhere safe, I said, and understood immediately that the sea is not a place, it is a condition. The ship's music, if any, reached us thinly, like memory thrown across distance. I cannot swear which tune traveled. I can swear that kindness did. Men lifting, women yielding space, strangers sharing warmth. I have told people that I remember hands and voices. They want notes and names. I have only the reality that compassion rose in a place too cold for anything else to rise easily. Hours became a shape. Stars pricked above, oars punctuated time. The Atlantic breathed with the oblivious regularity of something eternal. I found myself counting 1, 2, 3, just to hold the pieces of the present together. The officers' voices from other boats sounded briefly and were lost. The ship's lights tilted, dimmed, shuddered. I did not watch the final descent long. The dark is more informative than spectacle. Still, I cannot deny the sound. The groan of metal admitting defeat, the rush of water enforcing its argument, the high sharp cries that became a chorus and then did not. When the Carpathia loomed, her shadow folded over us like a curtain. Lines were thrown. Hands reached. Easy now, a sailor called down. We've got you. We rose in a sling, 2 at a time, the boat knocking, the rope creaking. A woman clutched my arm. Don't let go. I won't, I said, and I did not until her feet found deck, though it's suddenly a luxury, the smell of coffee a miracle. In here, miss. A nurse guided us into a room of blankets and tin cups and hastily written lists. Your name, she asked. Violet Jessop, I said, and watched ink make reality official. Later, in the mess, a steward pressed a cup into my hands. You're one of them, he said, not unkindly. One of whom? The ones who came back. I looked down at the coffee. It trembled as the engines pulsed. I came back, I said. Others did not. He seemed to want a version of arithmetic in which the smaller number wins. Coffee cannot do that. Nothing can. But warmth matters, and I drank. We slept where we could. We spoke when necessary. Many did not speak at all. On that ship, grief and relief were roommates forced by circumstance. A mother woke, reached for a hand that was not there, and pressed her palm to her own chest as if to find pulse and promise in the same place. A girl asked me, Is it true they played Nearer, My God, to Thee? I thought of a melody braided lightly through cold air and of wind, which can counterfeit music. I remember people helping, I said. I remember hands and voices. She looked disappointed, expecting a legend. I could not offer ghosts. I could only offer what kept us moving. When we reached New York, questions were a weather system, reporters, relatives, officials, each wanting language to stand in for loss, for responsibility, for explanation. What did you see? How did it happen? Were the lifeboats enough? There are answers to some of those. To others, there will never be answers that satisfy. I returned to work as soon as work was available. It seems strange to some, I know, that one would go back to sea after listening to it subtract so many lives. But ships had been my livelihood and my identity. The idea of walking away felt like abandoning a language I had finally learned to speak. "You're brave," someone told me. "I'm employed," I said. Both can be true, neither is wholly sufficient. In quieter moments, I thought of faces. The gentleman with the pale waistcoat and the steady hand for tea. The matron whose grip told me that the body insists on life even when it cannot command it. The child who wanted to promise the ocean does not permit. I let each memory come and go like weather. I learned to breathe slowly. I learned that sleep sometimes arrives late to a house the sea has visited. Crew talk changes after catastrophe. Humor takes on edges, then softens. Rituals acquire meaning beyond habit. A carefully folded sheet is no longer simply a standard. It is a declaration that order can survive even when order has failed in larger matters. Turkish bath at 5. A man said on another voyage, and I brought towels with a gravity that did not exist before April. Work is not a cure. Work is a bridge. People began calling me unsinkable. They meant it as admiration or wonder, or a joke applied, like ointment. The word sits oddly in the mouth when one's mind is full of names of the lost. I did not correct anyone. I did not accept it either. If a name must be given, let it be witness. I could carry that without falsehood. There are details I can offer that people do not ask for. How cold finds the wrist first. How rope burns are the only warmth in some moments. How stars seem nearer during fear and farther during grief. There are details people ask for that I cannot offer. Fearless men, certain notes, a future seen with clarity. The truth is less theatrical and more human. Many were brave, many were afraid, kindness was common, and the night was pitiless. I learned that I could assist while terrified, that duty can be a lantern when the world goes dark. I learned that survival is neither a virtue nor a vice, but a circumstance with obligations. I learned that the sea will take what it takes, and that those who remain must tell without ornament what they saw. In the weeks after, I had a recurring thought whenever I poured tea. The comfort of heat in a cup is larger than its size. A hand holding something warm remembers reasons to hold on. If the universe offers small mercies, we must accept them. If it demands that we carry memory, we must carry it cleanly, fact straight, no dishonest embroidery. I was Violet Jessop, stewardess of the Titanic, survivor of a ship the world believed could not fail. The Atlantic had written its terms in cold ink and steel. I did my work before, during, and after. I held hands. I answered questions. I stepped into a boat when my turn arrived. None of that is heroism, and all of it is human. The sea had divided reality once. It would do so again. I did not know when. I only knew that the next time I heard engines declare faith through vibration, I would listen, breathe, and keep my balance as the floor moved, and so must I. War changes the sound of everything, even the sea. In peacetime, a ship's engines speak in sentences about schedules and service. In war, their words shift to necessity and mercy. I joined the voluntary aid detachment as a nurse, trading uniform buttons for bandage knots, saloon chatter for the quiet arithmetic of pain. The Britannic, largest of the three sisters, no longer wore glamour. She was painted white, vast red crosses on her sides like declarations to the horizon. We carry the wounded. We had cots where there had once been chaise lounges, antiseptic where there had been perfume, stretcher drills where dancers once learned the turn of a waltz. I felt the difference in my hands immediately. A stewardess anticipates comfort. A nurse anticipates suffering and then meets it without flinching. The first time I walked her hospital corridors, the air was equal parts salt, carbolic, and starch. Light pooled on linoleum like calm water, and boots spoke softly so the injured could sleep. We practiced procedures until they were muscle memory, where to stand when a stretcher rounds a corner, how to lift with the spine, how to listen without letting horror stick to the mind like tar. Doctors moved through rooms with gentle command. Nurses traded words at the speed of need. Morphia here. Temperature, 16 hours. Keep the wound dry. I learned to speak that language quickly, to keep my fear dressed in competence. Fear can be tidy if you insist upon it. We were near Kea, the Greek island etched against winter light, on the morning the sea made its objection. November 21st, 1916. The water, blue as porcelain and just as deceptive, lay calm. The ship rolled modestly. Somewhere, a gull wrote its brief script against the sky. We were setting to routine, washing basins, checking dressings, coaxing broth into men whose stomachs had learned to refuse kindness, when the explosion landed like a judgment beneath the hull. There is no mistaking a mine. The shock arrives as if the ship has been punched from below by a titan. The sound is both inside and outside at once, metal screaming, air shoved sideways, the noise of certainty becoming its opposite. The Britannic lurched, listing so quickly every calculation in the body failed and had to be replaced by the simplest one. Stay upright, move, help. Forward, damage, a surgeon cried, already in motion. Bulkheads. The ship began to lean. Nurses grabbed railings. Basins slid. A tray of instruments skittered like a sudden, cruel orchestra. A patient asked me, "Am I dying?" And I told him, "Not now, because the answer to terror is sometimes temporal." Orders braided themselves through the air. Close doors, gather wards, ready boats. The pitch deepened, we were going down. We moved patients toward exits. There is a singular clarity in such moments. Lift, carry, reassure, repeat. Hands found straps, found other hands, found the answers bodies need when their owners cannot think. Somewhere below, water rushed itself through new corridors of steel, making a map it had not been asked to make. The engines kept turning, too long, someone would say later, but in that second the sound was proof of continued life, the only kind the ear could accept. Life jackets, a nurse called. I buckled one around a young orderly who looked 14 and had the voice of a boy trying to wear manhood quickly. "You're all right," I said. "You're upright, aren't you?" He nodded. Upright is sometimes the only victory one can claim. The list grew worse. Sunlight took a strange angle. Horizontal became diagonal. The ship's idea of itself altered in real time. I reached the deck with a line of nurses and convalescents, each counting steps as if rhythm could keep meaning intact. "Boats!" an officer shouted. "Lower away." His jaw was a command, his eyes were a crisis. Men moved ropes like sentences we depended upon. I saw a lifeboat drop too fast, wrong timing, a splash that did not sound like rescue. The hull's teeth were open, the propellers biting water with a hunger that could only be called blind. The engine order telegraph had not yet delivered silence. I felt the pull from the stern, water, oddly purposeful, making its case. "Come this way, come closer, come too close." We hesitated 1 second too long for thought, and 1 second not long enough for tragedy to decide whom it wanted. "Jump clear!" somebody screamed, the kind of scream that binds and frees in the same syllable. I went over the rail. Cold hit like a new definition of skin. The sea welcomed and rejected simultaneously, lifting and dragging. I surfaced, gasped, and understood the direction of violence in the water. Aft, toward the screws. The propellers, monstrous tulips of steel and purpose, churned their argument, pulling anything within their persuasion. The current took hold of me. This is the point where narrative tends to add a flourish, a miracle. There was no flourish, only calculus. Angle, breath, swim sideways, kick, refuse. My lungs argued, but I ordered them. "Breathe, Violet!" I heard, not my voice, my mother's, the guardian who had taught me to marry patience with air. I pushed away from the stern line, fought like a creature, not a person. The water consented. The pull loosened. A moment later, no clock can measure it, the current released me like a grudging admission. I rose again, coughed horror from my mouth, and looked back. The Britannic leaned like a wounded animal who refuses to surrender elegantly. Nurses yelled names. Men clung to ropes. A lifeboat splintered near the wake. What was wood against machinery? People say the word luck too easily. Call it luck if you like. I call it obedience to the physics of survival. We swam. A sailor reached me, his hand like a rope. "Come on, miss." He towed with economy, his breath relentless, his mind doing what minds do when asked to decide quickly. We found a boat that had cleared the worst. Arms hauled us into a shape that meant safety. Sound resumed its catalogue, the whine of wind, the crisis voice of men counting survivors, the new quiet of engines finally silenced too late for some. The Britannic sank quickly, almost theatrically in the scale of it, bow plunged, stern raised like a question to the sky, and then gone. No flickering salon lights this time, no promenade sentences of glass, no music to speculate upon. War strips away ornaments. Steel and sea did business without witnesses who wanted elegance. We were some of the witnesses, whether we wanted the role or not. On shore, shock arrived as it always does. Thin hands around 2 hot cups of tea, while blankets making temporary promises, lists written in tidy ink that could not tidy what they named. Your name. Where were you stationed? Did you see I had seen enough? I answered what I could, left the rest to administrations and inquiry boards and newspapers who would shape a story to fit the appetite of a nation at war. Hospital ship, I said. Mine. Quick. I did not supply adjectives to decorate inevitabilities. People asked me what the difference felt like between peacetime catastrophe and wartime catastrophe. The difference is not in fear. Fear is consistent. It is in the texture of duty. On the Titanic, duty meant comforting travelers. ferrying them from luxury's certainty to a lifeboat's humility. On the Britannic, duty meant insisting that wounded men believed they were worth saving twice, once from war, once from water. The second insistence has a particular gravity. You feel it in your spine for years. I returned to ships after the Britannic, as I had after the Olympic and the Titanic. It is one thing to tell a story about resilience. It is another to walk the gangway again and put your hands to the same work. Why did I go back? Because leaving would have felt like disowning a language I had become fluent in. Because work feeds a life that needs feeding. Because the sea had taken, but it had also given me competence, income, identity. You're fearless, someone said. I am not, I replied. I am accustomed. There is a difference, and it matters. Time passed. War ended. The White Star Line's giants aged into photographs and anecdotes. I grew older with them, hair silvering, knuckles telling the weather more honestly than the sky. Faces visited me in unbidden sequences. The tweed gentleman on the Olympic, the matron at boat 16, the boy who asked if ships sleep, the young orderly whose life jacket seemed like adulthood on his shoulders. The propeller's pull revisited me in dreams. Sometimes I felt it coming and swam away again. Sometimes I woke with air greedy in my lungs. I learned how to settle memory. Walk, make tea, let the mind choose what it will keep besides fear. People think healing looks like forgetting. It often looks like remembering evenly. Miss Unsinkable, they called me in speeches too brief to carry the detail, in articles that wanted one word to do the work of 50. I did not correct them publicly. Privately, I called myself witness. The ocean does not hand out achievements. It hands out assignments. Mine was to recall. A witness must be precise, not dramatic, generous, not indulgent. There are things I could say that would make stories prettier. I do not say them. The truth is enough. It is more than enough for the people who never returned. In rooms where survivors gather, there's a kind of silence no other room knows. Not solemnity, practical quiet. You understand at once that facts are heavy and must be lifted carefully. You understand that jokes can live here and not be betrayal, because laughter helps carry weight for a minute and then sets it down gently. You understand that small details, how a deck smells in fog, where the best light is for reading a label on a medicine bottle, the exact sequence of knots a sailor uses when he has only seconds, matter in ways a public will never ask about. Those rooms taught me to be grateful for specifics. A life is built from them. If survival carries obligation, mine became this: to perform my work well, to tell my stories cleanly, to avoid embroidery, to remember compassion in the arithmetic of catastrophe. I learned to define heroism modestly. Steady hands, clear instructions, the refusal to surrender before surrender is demanded. I learned to esteem the unnamed sailor whose rope found my wrist more than the idea of fate, which is only a name we give complexity when we are tired. Sometimes people ask whether I believe ships have souls. I say, they have purposes, and purposes feel like souls when we stand inside them. The Olympic's soul was confidence. The Titanic's soul was certainty turned to humility. The Britannic soul was mercy underlined by risk. Mine changed by contact with each. Confidence learned caution. Certainty learned witness. Mercy learned stubbornness. I am not what the sea found. I am what the sea left. I kept working. I kept breathing. I kept folding sheets with respect for corners, because corners symbolize something, order, maybe dignity. I poured tea with the knowledge that heat in a cup can remind a hand to hold on. I moved down corridors the way one moves through memory, at a pace that keeps you from stumbling, with eyes open to be kind. How did you manage? People ask. The truthful answer is not grand. I managed by doing my job before, during, and after. I managed by letting duty be the lantern when the world went dark. I managed by allowing fear to live in me without letting it steer. I have been asked many times to explain luck. I cannot. I can explain work. I can explain balance on a moving floor. I can explain listening for the sentence an engine speaks that tells you everything is still as it should be, or that everything is now otherwise. If luck visited me, it wore the clothes of attention, of training, of refusal. I will not pretend that those were always sufficient, but they were mine to practice, and practice is the only prayer I know that can be answered in human terms. When I sit by a window now and watch a horizon that remembers those ships more clearly than any exhibit ever will, I feel two forces in equal measure: sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the names I do not always speak aloud because the list would break my voice. Gratitude for breath, for work, for the way time permits us to become caretakers of our own pasts. The ocean taught me economies, of strength, of words, of promises. It taught me that we are small and stubborn, and sometimes, miraculously, delivered back to shore with enough of ourselves intact to keep going. If a name must be given to me, give witness first. If a second is required, stewardess will do, to remind those who listen that service is not the opposite of courage, but one of its forms. Miss Unsinkable was never mine to claim. The ocean proved the opposite again and again. But unsinkable or not, I remained. I told the truth. I poured tea. I tightened straps. I jumped when jumping was the only answer. I swam sideways because forward was death. I took the hand offered. I gave mine in return. I am Violet Jessop, nurse of the Britannic, stewardess of the Titanic and the Olympic, woman of ships and shores. The sea took much. It left me with memory. I carry it carefully, without flowers that do not belong, without thorns that belong to someone else's garden. If you ask me what I learned, I will say that duty can be a lantern, that kindness is a rope, that breath, stubborn and ordinary, is the oldest form of resistance we have. And when the floor moves, so must we. Subscribe for more videos.